Hi, my name is Layne Hanson. I also go by Spooks online as my handle. I'm a cybersecurity threat analyst, and I'm also an officer with 801 Labs, which is a local hackerspace nonprofit in Salt Lake. If you're not familiar with us, 801labs.org. Just come on out. We're there every Thursday. Essentially, this talk is on the story of my experience of feeling lost in my career and direction. We're just a little story time. And essentially, this is the story of how I was able to mitigate $64,000 of fraud in a 4-month time span. So that said, this is adopting the analyst mindset, uncovering fraud through curiosity and action. I want to start this off by adding some context before I start explaining the problem. What are contact lenses? I'm sure everyone is aware of what they are. They're a thin piece of plastic that you put into your eye to correct your vision. However, people don't realize that they're actually considered a medical device. So with them being considered a medical device and being regulated by the FDA, it requires you to have a prescription being prescribed by an eye care physician or a physician. Your normal doctor can prescribe contact lenses, which is awesome, but not a lot of people know that it requires a prescription. So that said, given the national regulations behind it, there is also some international regulations, which pretty much there is none, except for like specific countries. So for example, Japan, they will only let you have like a 2-month supply at a time, which is crazy. If you order more than that quantity, they will dispose of them in customs. However, there's also some internal policies and law nationally where if a customer orders their product and they don't have their prescription, we'll then contact the doctor to get verification and make sure that everything's okay before shipping out the order. That's typically a 24-hour time span. So if the doctor doesn't get back to us within that time span, we can assume that all is well and we can ship the order out in good faith. So my main point here is what is the analyst mindset? I like to think of like the analyst mindset as the science class hypothesis, where you have an educated guess and then you create an experiment to test out that educated guess and see what the result is. I like to think of it also as lead-driven, context-based discovery and action. So it's about being curious and creative with data and what you're observing. And it's also about like being hands-on to understand how something works. Like I'm sure we all have been interested in some sort of thing where we want to take it apart and then put it back together and try to like understand how it works completely. So that's what I think of the analyst mindset. It's about being curious and analytical. So diving into the main point of the presentation, where there's business, there's fraud. It doesn't matter what kind of business you are bound to have some sort of fraud. This is a survey that was sent out by S&P Global or 451 Research back in 2020, where they had 263 responses, and what was asked was, how do you think like fraud is impacting your business? And then what are the sub-levels of it impacting your business? So 41% of those responses said that fraud is impacting their business. They do consider it as a concern. What was surprising seeing this statistic, though, is that there was a high customer experience impact, which could mean a variety of things, such as the efforts that they're doing in their fraud mitigation program is impacting real customers, and that's not what they want. That affects revenue. Mainly for my side of things, of what got me interested in this as a passion project on top of my role with that company as a customer service supervisor, was we didn't really have the headcount to tackle this. This was a problem that I was interested in, and it was a problem that I was invested in to try to take on. The main thing that was a concern for me, though, for the business was the damage to brand and reputation, as well as the authorization rate impact. When you have so many payment disputes, what will happen is the merchant, I believe that's what they call them. Think of them like Visa, MasterCard, payment bank institutions, things like that. They'll increase your authorization rate, which is their little portion of your sell, since you're using their payment network. So it's very concerning of how some businesses don't try to like tackle fraud, but ultimately, I'm very excited to talk about my experience doing it because it's very interesting and it also helped me transition into security. So initial observances is there was high payment disputes, abnormally high. And basically you can think of a dispute as, everyone has a credit card. So let's say you buy something and it never gets to you and you got to call your card issuer and be like, hey, I never got the product. And then it goes through that whole dispute process. So what we're seeing is there was a high rate of these disputes where the order actually arrives to these individuals. What was also observed was the use of mail forwarding services. So it wasn't going to like residential addresses. It was going to businesses that were, my speculation was that they were then being forwarded to the individual that was placing these orders. Also, fake identities was being used to not really real people based off of what I can find on the internet, as well as fraudulent prescriptions. The things about prescriptions that are so interesting to me is that really the prescription can be written on anything. Anyone can bring up a Word document, fake a signature, whatever, and you kind of like take it out at face value. So the one on the left is not like a real contact lens prescription. Obviously, I drew that just for disclosure. But the one on the right is a very real prescription, even though it has information. Like we all know, Jane Doe is not really a real person. I don't know if anyone has met Jane Doe. I'd be really surprised. Anyways, this is like what a real contact lens prescription looks like. It's so easy to fake. So in terms of things that were in place to try to help stop fraud, it was very easy to bypass this when you look at it from a high level. So given all of those initial observances of the patterns we're seeing with disputes, essentially I had to gain visibility, which I had as an iterative cycle of events. That was really slow. Parsing the event and then flagging the event if it meets a certain detection criteria, reviewing the event, and then taking action on the event based off of review, like if it's a true positive or if it's a false positive. And then I would tune those alerts accordingly, and I would also build that into the internal intelligence that I was building throughout this program. And this was just an iterative process. So it was something that was continuously changing. Sometimes my information I had was not always correct, and so that I would have to tune it accordingly, which was very frustrating, but it's okay. So one thing to also consider is that I was in a race against time. The business that I was working for has arguably the nation's largest inventory of contact lenses. And our whole goal was to ship out orders as fast as possible. And that was how we were being abused and how I couldn't really catch them initially, is because orders were going out too fast before I can review the detection and then take action on that detection. But I also had to get creative. When I started this, I did not have an idea of where the data was existing. I had access to our Splunk instance. So I was looking at our other queries the developers were creating, what the results were giving, and how can I tweak that to get what I'm looking for.
Right.
I also had to get creative in the sense of how would I be alerted if an order was marked as fraud by someone in the company, or if a chargeback has occurred on an account. So I had to parse the account notes for a daily keyword scan. And if it meets a certain requirement, it would then flag and alert me. So then I would then review, and that would ultimately also feed my closed intelligence loop. I also had to add signals because from what was being discovered is presumably these cards are stolen credit cards. A lot of these accounts that was being observed was had high rates of payment ad failures to the account. So they're entering in information that may have been part of a different campaign, and that customer has already had a new card issued, or the bank's intelligence has detected it as abnormal and has blocked it. So with back to query reuse and tuning that, I also had to adopt the existing searches to expose account to address relationships. Since a lot of the addresses that were being used was used in very abnormally high repetition. I would then plug in the address and see what accounts that address was tied to based off of orders that has shipped, just so I can continue building intelligence, as well as creating session ID and account linkage dashboard to aid in an investigation. What's really interesting, though, as I was gaining this visibility, is that visibility was unlocking behavior patterns that were not normal. It was not following a normal customer process of logging into their account, uploading their prescription, looking for what they need, putting in their prescription information, order payment information, so forth. But what was interesting is that, as I mentioned, there was dropshipping addresses used with typo squatting evasion. Initially, I was building detections based off of addresses that I knew, based off of observing, was associated with fraud and was high risk. However, these end users were noticing that and tweaking the address accordingly. So adding weird spaces, a 3 instead of an E, those sorts of things. And when the order ships, the shipper would update the label and it would still go to the destination, which was really interesting. The fast shipping was also exploited. As I mentioned, we fulfill orders really fast. So orders go out the door within 24 hours. So I definitely had a time constraint to review the alert and take action. There was a lot of high card ad failures, which was then associated with fraud blocks, which is if the card was, if it failed so many times trying to be added to the account will be locked. So even if they do put a card in that would lead to a success, the system would still deny it. And with all these card ad failures and them basically spamming these card information in, there's a lot of chargebacks, which is payment disputes. They were obfuscating their digital identity, I guess you can call it, with VPN usage and IP rotation. So they're definitely using VPN services to as like a pivot, because you can always block an IP address, but it's pretty easy to change your IP address. There is also abnormal and frequent site refreshes to check on order status to see if the order has went through. There was also multi-account creation, so that just doesn't follow normal customer behavior. I mean, password managers exist, but you can only really have one email per account. So that has to go through effort of creating all these email addresses and constantly logging in and out of them. There was also what was really interesting as I researched further into this is they also had a strategic use of our online customer service feature. So they would reach out to our chat representatives to get the order updated to a known fraudulent address after entering in a completely fake address that's associated with real residents. And that was bypassing my detections for a very long time. because my detection logic was based off of when the order was placed and not when the order was updated on our side of the system. So visibility led to behavioral grouping. This was during my time when I was learning about like threat intelligence and things like that. So I was like, I wanted to be cool and edgy and create a little acronym for them to track them internally. So I created it with KFA, which is a known fraudulent actor. I made it up, and it's basically a bad guy, is how you can think of it. So again, with all these behaviors that was being observed, it allowed behavioral grouping. And for the longest time, I thought I was tackling like one entity. However, I discovered with behavioral pattern observations that I was actually experiencing going against two different entities that were committing fraud in different capacities. So KFA01 and KFA02, I'm just going to call them as O1 and O2 since that's a mouthful. O1 used primarily Eastern Asian aliases, whereas O2 used a lot of Slavic aliases. O1 used a lot of Eastern Asian and Australian networks, and O2 used a lot of American and Canadian networks. So at that point, with O1, it's like, okay, I think in terms of geolocation, they're like Eastern Asia, Australia, around that area. And O2, still not really quite sure, but with the unique usage of Slavic aliases, I mean, I can't really say a name that's Slavic off the top of my head. So it's very unique, which means that they have some background cultural experience with it. O1 had a lot of IP rotation and session reuse. So session reuse in the sense that they were logging in and out of accounts, which maintained the same session ID, and then I would be able to track how many accounts utilize that specific session ID, since it's basically a unique identifier. So I was kind of like able to fingerprint them that way. O2 had IP rotation with high refresh rates, but they weren't like logging in and out of accounts and following O1's behavior. O1 would do low value order spam. So they're logging in and out of accounts, placing a lot of these orders for a low value to evade detection for like a high value order. Where O2 is brave. They were placing very high value orders, which was triggering a lot of my detections. However, with us shipping products so fast, I wasn't able to catch it in time. O1 would conduct customer service, but they were very unique with it. I think one of my fondest experiences with that was observing when they were getting upset when we were catching on that they were committing fraud, and letting them know to call a number that would get in touch with my team, so we can see if it's a real customer or not. O2, what was really interesting is I like to view them as a fraud prescription mill. They were using online services. So as I mentioned with contact lenses, you have to have a prescription in order to purchase the product. However, what they were doing was using these online services where you can renew your prescription to create legit prescriptions, but they weren't for like an actual customer. They're just random product information that they were ordering. O1 was easier to disrupt because I was able to track their sessions and review it that way. O2 was harder to disrupt because, again, we were shipping out orders very fast. My detection logic wasn't being used in the way that we didn't have a program in place where if I wasn't there, someone else can then take up that work and review it and take action on it. But anyways, it got to a point where I was like, okay, how do we start stopping these guys? And I had to become evil. I think it's kind of funny watching them throw a fit when we're like couching onto them. I felt bad for our customer service reps that was taking the heat for that, but I let them know like, hey, just like disconnect on them. It's fine. I'm so sorry. But how I started disrupting them is I had evolving address block lists. And I had to get to a point where I was creating wildcard queries that were meet a certain requirement of like what the address had on it. I mean, you always need like a 4242 for the residence number or the zip code's always going to be the same. So I would create my detections based off of that, of what I know is always the same. And yeah, sure, I had some like false positives, but as time went on, I was able to tune them so that I was having less false positives. I would also recall the packages. So if it was in the United States, I would just send a request over to UPS to send it on back, so they will never get the product. Also account lockout with holding orders and temporary net blocks. So as I mentioned, they're using VPN services. So I would watch their session of what IP they're using, look that up using open source intelligence, see if it's a VPN service, what that net block looks like, what ASN it's associated with, and having a temporary block on those IP ranges. So they can always, refresh their connection, which might give them a different IP, but then they'll have to connect to a completely different server in order to pivot essentially. But a lot of this was done based off of session monitoring and how they were interacting with their site. And the best security programs have security awareness training. So I also was increasing awareness in the call center of letting them be aware, like, hey, this is the behaviors that these individuals are exhibiting. If you see this, let me know. I will review it. And also letting the shipping teams know, because they're the ones that are printing the labels and sending the product out the door. So what I want to get into of the main point of my conversation or my talk is that Rome was not built in a day. This was like an iterative process of failure and success, and building on to success through learning through failure. And again, I was able to mitigate $64,000 of fraud within a 4-month time span, and arguably more as time went on. And it ultimately helped me with my career progression. It helped me gain transferable skills that has built me to the analyst I am today. And it also has allowed me to learn how to collaborate and communicate with stakeholders. When you can speak to numbers, business loves that. And also being able to reason with people in terms of advocating for the thing that you want implemented. So that said, I am saying adopt the analyst mindset to get the skills you want, even if it's on your own time. Establish that win-win scenario. I was able to establish that win-win scenario with the business and the aspect of getting access to resources like Splunk, resources like people who can help me with the queries, or people that I could reach out to where I can find where the data's at that I was looking for. So I know how to hit the right database. Essentially, it has a lot to do with resource discovery, business advocation, data analysis, documenting those findings, taking action on findings, showcasing the results, and repeating the process. It's a loop. So adopt the analyst mindset, be passionate, be creative, be curious. Thank you.